to 3252. What's your status?
3252. We're on the wall. Hello, everyone. Welcome to On the Wall with New Orleans EMS. I am Jessica Barber, one of the field paramedics here, with my co-host.
And I'm David Rayburn, one of the deputy medical directors here at New Orleans EMS.
This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we wanted to bring our mental health coordinator, Emily Reilly, in to help us talk about the struggles that we have as EMS providers with our mental health. We all go through it, and we want to talk about it in a little bit different way today. Emily has been really great. She's been with us for the last 2 years. She's on-site therapist. She's our cheerleader. She has done such a great job helping us all manage the trauma that we face every day on the truck.
And I think it's probably important to recognize that this position is not common in EMS, but the problems that EMS providers face are very prevalent. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So having somebody like Emily be accessible to the paramedics is huge.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I think what I love about having Emily here is having someone to call us out also when we're trying to cover up how dark things feel sometimes and kind of hide our own insecurities with that self-deprecating humor that we do in EMS to cope. And Emily is always here to kind of recenter us and remind us where we are actually allowed to feel our feelings and not just make jokes about them.
Right. I think the jokes are really important. I don't want any of you to stop with the jokes.
Okay.
I just want you to also feel your feelings when you need to and figure out the right time and the right place to do that so it feels a little bit more balanced.
Yeah.
I think that's probably something that people listening to this need some help understanding, because the paradigm in EMS has always been box it up, put it in the corner for later.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it has shifted to you need to talk about your feelings or you're going to burn out of this profession. But there's probably some middle ground to that, right?
Yes, I think we went a little bit too far. When I started in the mental health field, no one was talking about anything. No one wanted to admit they had PTSD. This was in first responders, by the way. It was hard to get anybody to talk about any mental health symptom that wasn't sleep or maybe anger. And now we've shifted so far to the other side that I think there's this pressure to talk about your feelings all the time and immediately after calls and have the debriefings and participate in all of these mental health conversations. And that's not necessarily healthy either. The key is finding a balance that works for you, but that's going to be different for everybody. So I think my hope today is that we can talk a little bit about how everyone listening might find that balance for themselves.
That's a hard balance. It's really difficult. And I know
Sure.
there's a lot of arguments even on the streets that's like, I had this really tough call. I'm kind of falling apart, but do I stay and help all these other people and try to get my mind off of it? Or do I go home and just stare at a wall and then fixate on that call? So what is your advice kind of in those scenarios to tell which one's going to work better for you? Or is that something we just have to figure out?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, of course, you have to make sure that if you're going to stay after a difficult call, that you really can provide care to the best of your ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like make sure that you are safe to be on the truck, that you're thinking clearly, that you can do your job the way that you need to do your job for the patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as that's still on board, then I think you do get to kind of play around with it and figure out what's going to be helpful to you and what's not. And it might change depending on the call. It might change depending on what else is going on in your life, what your stress level is. If you've had a week of bad sleep and you're fighting with your spouse at home and the kids are exhausting you, you might not have anything left after a difficult call and you might need to go home and rest, when normally you would be able to kind of take a deep breath, take a little break, reset yourself and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big keys, I think, is developing some self-awareness.
Okay. That's a huge thing to ask
It is.
EMS providers sometimes, especially from a mental health perspective, right?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things I want to talk about was an example from myself, right? Of a call where I felt like I really pushed that boundary of I probably shouldn't have been on the truck anymore. Right. So I had a patient. It had been a long day. We'd been busy. It was back to back to back to back calls. I didn't have time to eat. I hadn't been sleeping well. I was not setting myself up for success.
Sure.
But like we were saying, right? It's EMS, rub some dirt in it, get over it, finish your days on, and then you can figure out yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a patient who had been woken up with Narcan. And in the back of the truck en route to the hospital, that patient became very aggressive and very violent with me, right? Mm-hmm. So he ended up in a situation where he was going to need more Narcan, and he knew that it was coming, and I had to give it to him, but I was alone. And when I tried to administer that Narcan, he grabbed my hand, right? And so in that moment, I'm in the back of this moving vehicle. I don't have anyone else back there with me, and he already has a hold of me, right? And so I'm having that reaction that like, oh crap, I'm in this bad situation. What am I supposed to do? And I think generally I'm really good at calming myself down, checking in with myself, asking when I need help. But in that moment, I think I was just so scared. And it turned from being understanding and thinking critically to just like being overcome with like rage, right? And so like in that moment, my reaction, thankfully, was just like taking the syringe and getting out of that grasp. And then I threw it against the wall. But it was in a way where like I felt violent, you know, like I felt like I was walking right up to that line. Like this may go really bad. But it's difficult, I think, in those moments to know what it's going to be that finally triggers it, right? Like what is the final straw? And you don't want to let your coworkers down. You don't want to let that patient down, right? Who had a real medical complaint. But also, I have to end up in a situation where I'm not about to throw my patient around the back of the truck.
Right.
And so like, where in that was I supposed to recenter myself? You know, and I think those are the calls that are tough to navigate in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of key points where you can kind of pause for a little bit and take a breath and focus in on yourself a little bit more. I think if it gets to the point where you are triggered like that, then getting as much space as you can just for a brief moment of time is really important. Because what's happening is you're having this big fight or flight reaction, right? And that could be because it's a really stressful situation. That could be because PTSD is triggered. That could be for all kinds of reasons. But what's happening in your brain is that the logical parts are not completely going offline, but they're not functioning as well as they normally do. And the let me just solve this problem instinctually part of your brain is going full force. So in order to kind of reset that balance to where you can think a little bit, getting some space and taking a deep breath and then doing whatever you can to calm down in that moment to bring yourself back down is going to be really key. And then you can figure out, am I responding appropriately or am I responding from a place of my own stress reaction?
Yeah. And that's tough.
It's
tough, like in the middle of that like white hot rage or the fear, to be able to take that moment to like sit back down or do whatever you can. Dr. Rayburn, have you been in a situation like that before in the ED?
Oh, 100%, but I'm not in the back of an ambulance trapped in a box. And I can look at my patient and say, we're not going to do this and walk out of the room.
Call hospital security.
And that's what's happened. You know, but I have that opportunity to walk away. And I think you highlighted some of that, things leading up to that call that already put you in a place that you weren't in your best headspace to deal with. And I think that that's a lot of these things is that self-awareness, recognizing that I'm not functioning at my best today. I have X, Y, and Z going on. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm under-caffeinated, whatever the case may be, you know. But I think more just being aware that today might be a day that something's going to catch me off guard. And just, again, I think if you think about it, you've already done yourself a huge favor.
Sure. I think communicating with your partner becomes a huge part of this as well. And that like almost familial tie that you have with someone on a truck when they're your regular partner. That's like, listen, man, I'm not doing well today. Like, I need you to look out if I start to get really aggressive or if I start to snap back, whatever it is. Like, I need you to tell me and have that kind of accountability within that team too, right? Because having a resource like Emily is awesome, but I have to call you and I have to get myself to call you.
Yes.
You know? So maybe that setting up of like a safety net.
Yeah.
And the other people who are with you for that 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is huge.
And I think Dr. Rayburn brings up a really great point too about control. You know, you were saying you have the ability to walk out of the room, and that's more control over the situation than when you're in the back of the ambulance.
Right.
So if you can think through ahead of time of what might these situations be that could be really stressful or triggering, and how can I get back just a little sense of control, that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because the worst part of any stressful situation is not being in control, right? That feeling of helplessness, we don't like that. We don't deal with that very well usually. So if you can restore a little sense of agency and of control, that can do a lot to help you calm down as well.
Do you have any advice for something we might be able, like something small we might be able to do in the back to feel that sense of control regain? Like, is that looking like deciding to sit behind the patient and just kind of like, we don't have to talk. I'm going to keep an eye on your vitals. I'm going to make sure you're doing okay. Is it asking your partner to pull over? Like, what kind of things do you think would be helpful in that situation?
Absolutely. I think sitting behind your partner was the one that I immediately thought of. Anything to create a little bit of space. I'm sorry, sitting behind your patient was the first thing that I thought of.
It is also behind your partner.
Well, sure. No matter where you are in the ambulance, sit behind your partner, right?
Sure.
Anything to create a little bit of space between you and the patient in a way that they're still safe and they're still being monitored. You're not totally checking out, right? I'm not suggesting that.
Right.
But I am suggesting just for a period of time, like, you know, back up a little bit and give yourself a little bit more personal space. And that can be enough just to help bring you down a little bit and get back in control of the situation.
So in that situation, that was ultimately what I decided to do, right? I scared myself with the way that I felt and the way that I reacted. It was so goofy about it was as soon as I wasn't yelling at him anymore or interacting with him directly, all of a sudden he like started behaving like this hurt toddler. I was like, well, why aren't you talking to me anymore? Like, why are you sitting back there? Did I make you mad? Yes, absolutely. You made me mad. What? But it's a thing. And, you know, you both know me pretty well it was almost like I had escalated that situation in my head and it hadn't even registered with the patient, you know? And so then that turns into a conversation of like, how aggressive was I really? Or did I just feel aggressive about it? And then that was taking a toll on me. It's just like such a strange reaction for that patient to have in that situation. Interesting.
But a lot of times too, and this happens in the emergency department as well, is that people don't realize how they're acting necessarily because they're hurt, they're scared, whatever the case may be, and reframing it to tell them or show them how they're acting. Often they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come off that way." But there's other times too where they're not going to be redirectable. My suggestion was going to be rocuronium, but I don't think that's appropriate. I think Emily's ideas are better.
Well, that's why you have your job and I have mine, right?
Just paralyze them.
I mean, my anger level just went down thinking about it.
Well, and that patient feels really helpless, and then you've created a whole new problem for a whole different therapist.
You're right.
Oh, God, that's a whole other conversation. We'll table that one for another day. So overall, it sounds like, unfortunately, the answer is we have to do the work outside of the ambulance to be able to handle situations like this.
Yes. You have to do the work outside of the ambulance to like keep yourself in the best space possible, to know yourself. And the more you practice this stuff when you're calm, the easier it's going to be to implement when you're in that stressful moment, right? Because no one's going to come up with like a brand new skill when they're in the middle of being triggered or super stressed out. That's not how human beings function.
That feels a lot like talking to our procrastination thing. That's like, you're not going to do it right if you're under pressure. I'm not going to do it at all if I'm not under pressure, actually.
Well, the more automatic skills are, the easier time our brain has of just going right into those when it's stressed and can't think clearly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is a good exercise that we can practice when we're calm and at home to kind of train us for those moments?
Mm-hmm. This is such a stereotypical therapist answer. I wish I had something different to say, but deep breathing.
I swear to God.
I know.
I told these people that this was going to be different, Emily.
I know. Well, I'm not recommending yoga yet, so.
And we haven't even talked about nutrition.
Right.
Well, okay, so but why does breathing help so much then? Like, why is that such a mainstay?
Mm-hmm. So it gets your sympathetic nervous system back in balance with your parasympathetic. Because what happens in the fight or flight reaction is that those two systems are off balance, right?
Sure.
And the quickest, easiest, most accessible way for any of us to restore calm and restore that balance is through deep breathing. It's a direct communication to your body that you are safe.
Mm-hmm.
I think connection with other people is another really great practice just to help yourselves feel calmer in general. That's not going to be one you can go to in the back of the ambulance. You can't like phone a friend when you get stressed out with a patient.
It's FaceTime my mom.
But if you have strong social connections in the rest of your life, that can just help calm you down in general. And so you'll feel a little bit more resilient, a little bit more able to handle these types of stressful calls.
And I think you and I talked about this offline before we started, but the social connection thing is huge. And it's hard when you work for 12 hours doing your job in therapy, doing Jessica's job as a paramedic, doing my job in the ER. It's hard to want to go and be social after that. But
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that, for me personally, when I convince myself to do it, it gives me a level of decompression that not a lot of other things do, and kind of helps reset. But recognizing that there's plenty of days where I just want to go home and not talk to anybody and sit in the quiet.
Right.
Right. And that's exactly how I feel too. I mean, I want to emphasize that these things sound simple, but they're not easy. I also have to force myself to take deep breaths in stressful situations. I also have to force myself to go out and be social after work. Because I just want to go home and sit on the couch with my dogs and not talk to anybody else. But it is important. And I do find that I feel better when I'm regularly doing all these things that I tell all of you to do all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and you're just a sponge for all of our like neuroses and trauma anxieties because you're the first person we call.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is also, I guess, what paramedics are as well, right? We're taking in
Yes.
everyone's emotions, everyone's
Yes.
stress in a very difficult time. Rather not, what they're going through is truly life-threatening. They believe it is. And that is triggering all of those same issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for us, especially, I think, to go and socialize after, I'm like, I don't want to hear about anyone else's problems. I am so tired of hearing about people's problems.
My husband and I have had that argument.
Yeah, I bet you have. So what do you do for yourself besides the breathing? Like, you're married, so you have someone at home all the time that you have to interact with. You don't have a choice about it. What do you do when you go home and we've worn you all the way down? And then you're dealing with your husband and his like very valid things that he wants to talk to you about.
Yeah. So we have really had to work on communication, and I've had to work really hard on knowing myself and letting him know what I need. So a lot of times it's, hey, my 20-minute drive home was not enough decompression time. I'm going to go walk the dogs. Once I get back from that, I'm here for whatever.
Yeah.
Before I started doing that, I would walk in the door and he would just want to talk to me immediately because he was so excited to see me,
Right.
which is wonderful. And it didn't work that well. So it's an ongoing process of learning yourself and communicating that to other people.
How receptive was he about that? Like when you first brought it up?
He totally got it. He was very receptive. He has a lot longer drive home from work than I do. He usually gets home before I do. So he has like several hours to decompress before I walk through the door. Right. So it totally made sense to him. He was like, yeah, if it was reversed, I would need the same thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're married to a doctor.
Yeah.
So how do y'all work that?
No, and I think it's the same for us. We learned the hard way by not communicating our needs. And when we figured out that that's what was actually going to tell the other person what was going on, once we figured that out, things were a lot easier because it was, I need a minute. I'm going to go in the backyard for 15 minutes and just sit outside and then come back in and we'll chat about the day.
Right. I'm not brooding. I'm not pouting.
Right.
I just need a second.
Correct. Exactly.
And she was also receptive to that.
Yes, because she had been trying to figure out a way to tell me the same thing.
Like to do that thing?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. You have the extra layer of kids on top of that, though. So how do you manage interacting with your children, being loving, being supportive, even when you're coming home in a dark mood?
This is one that I still struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
And working with my own therapist to figure these things out, because it's the guilt layer of wanting to make sure that my kids feel that love and affection, but also recognizing that after X, Y, and Z things that I did today, I really just don't care about what my son did during PE that day.
Which is fine.
And it is okay. I have to own that. But one of my best friends gave me the pointer that there's a lot of, wow, oh, cool, buddy, while I'm thinking about or listening to music or whatever else the case may be.
Right. So allowing yourself to not be interested, but still love your child.
Absolutely.
And make them feel loved.
Correct.
Without that guilt. I mean, I can't even imagine. I have a cat. So all I have to do. And my 4 reptiles.
So your cat's
care.
already mad at you when you get home anyways.
It's fine. There's nothing I can do to make that cat happy with me.
Exactly.
And there is some solace in that, you know.
I feel like that's good practice for other situations in life.
There you go.
I think so too. Yeah. I see what you did there. So I just have to treat patients like my cat. That's what we learned.
That's not what you said. I want to switch gears because I think this is another area. I think the getting angry in situations is something that happens often in this profession. But I think the other one that I worry about and gets talked about a lot is the empathy.
Sure.
And so we'll just throw the hypothetical out there, which we were kind of doing when we were prepping this session anyways, so let's just say you worked a pediatric cardiac arrest.
Sure.
And you didn't have a good outcome. You're still there. You've used some of the techniques that Emily discussed and feel like you're in an okay place to continue the shift. And then the next call you go on is somebody with 1 month of toe pain, who the first thing they say to you is, I want pain medication. Right? That's a realistic scenario, right?
It is. It happens all the time.
And how do you, I think obviously this question is for Emily, but what strategies or techniques can you use to maintain that empathy in that situation where this person who is making an unreasonable request has no idea what you're going through?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I think that's one of the big challenges that you all have to work through on a daily basis. First of all, I want to say it's okay not to feel empathy all the time. I think maybe a few eyebrows will raise with that statement, but I really think that if you feel as empathetic as possible to every patient that you ever see, that's a recipe for burnout. You have to be able to kind of put up some walls and provide excellent care and still guard your own emotions a little bit. So first of all, forgive yourselves if you have those days or those patients where you're not as empathetic as maybe you wish that you could be, as long as you are still providing good care for that patient.
I think that's, I don't know if it just hits me personally. But I mean, that's guilt that I feel in the field all the time. That's like in the same way where, you know, we pop back in our heads towards patients. That's like, I don't care about this. This is not important. But it goes both ways, right? I mean, that patient also doesn't care what happened to us before this. And it's fine that they don't. They have no idea what we just ran. They have no idea the context of our job or what it really takes. And it's not their job to understand that, right? Mm-hmm. But it is hard for me as an empathetic person, as a person who really cares about my patients, to end up in that situation where I feel like I don't care and I just don't have the empathy because I don't have anything left. And that guilt is hard. It's I don't even know that there's like a solution for it other than
it sounds like you have to give yourself some grace.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And also definitely a plug for that any profession where you're dealing with death and dying, if you don't have some outlet that you consider therapy, whether it's your significant other, your actual therapist, your cat, whatever the case may be, like this is real though, right? It's not normal for people to see people die on a regular basis. Like that's not normal.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I think making sure that you have those tools and recognize that in yourself, that I have an abnormal job.
Yeah.
And I need to protect myself in whatever ways I can. I think is huge.
Yeah. I think the debriefing with partners and friends within the medical community is a huge part of that, is being able to talk to them about all of these things, right? Because we can have these loved ones, we can have these people that we depend on, but there like is something about knowing so acutely what that kind of guilt feels like that other people are just not going to understand. So there has to be some kind of community and support within your medical community as well, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I think Emily will probably agree with this. My wife's line in the sand is don't talk about pediatric calls to her.
Sure.
So I have to have another avenue for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, one of these communication things that we learned the hard way.
Right.
And I think that's probably part of it is us having kids now. But definitely I need to debrief that. And so now I know I have to find a different place to do that.
Do you have a different place to do that?
I do.
Good. Strong work. Yeah, I think similarly, I have a best friend, been friends forever. She knows me better than anyone, but there are some things that like I'm not allowed to talk to them about, you know? Mm-hmm. And that was a boundary that I was actually recommended to set up in my first EMS job, is like find who your people are and talk about the boundaries before they happen. That's like, these are the kinds of calls that I have. Is there anything in there that you're uncomfortable hearing about or just like cannot deal with? And know that ahead of time, so you know when you have those calls, like you're going to have to find someone else. And I guess that's part of the homework, right? That you're talking about, stuff like that, because we don't want to burn out our loved ones either. You know?
Absolutely.
Can you kind of talk about the idea of that secondary trauma as well, that spouses, loved ones, friends of first responders end up experiencing because of these things, right? Like kind of what that concept is.
Yeah. So secondary trauma is the idea that you have not gone through that specific traumatic situation, but you've heard about it secondhand, and you still can have a big stress reaction. You can still have PTSD symptoms. You can still have a reaction to it because it was so difficult to hear. You can still have emotional exhaustion and kind of secondary burnout, even if you're listening to someone talk about their calls over and over and over and over.
Right.
So I think it is incredibly important to, like you all were saying, to be able to set those boundaries with your loved ones, to talk to them about what they're able to hear and what they're not, and know that those might have to be renegotiated.
Sure.
You know, someone might feel okay hearing about a certain type of call, and then they're going through something stressful in their life, and that needs to be off limits for a little bit.
Yeah. I think I need like a recorder in my pocket that's like Emily reminding me of all the things it's okay to feel, you know, like I'm allowed to feel angry and mean and like have no empathy left. Like it's fine.
Yes. Your feelings are never wrong. Your feelings just are what they are. That's the number one therapy lesson. It's behaviors that can turn into a problem.
I think one of the first things you said to me the first time I came to you after a tough call was like, your feelings are always correct. and you can't control your feelings. You feel what you feel, but you choose how you respond to them.
Correct.
And that is something that stays in my head a lot, I think, that in the situation where I don't have control over all the things that I'm feeling, I am still in control of like my physical body and the things that come out of my mouth. And I should try to control those things.
Yes. And that is a much better focus for you than beating yourself up about your feelings or trying to figure out why you're having them in the moment or
Right.
telling yourself I shouldn't be feeling this way, because they're going to be there no matter what. So all of that is just wasted energy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can learn to channel that energy into what's going to help me feel better, what's going to help me get through this moment, what do I need physically, mentally, emotionally, that's where you're going to see a difference.
Shout out to my partner Wyatt, who just left me on the truck, because that was always his first question when we got to the end of a difficult call was, what do you need? Do you need to take a nap? Do you need to eat? Do you need to just yell about it? Tell me what you need to do before we clear.
Well, there's a program called psychological first aid that is often taught to volunteers who respond to disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the huge components of psychological first aid is getting people what they need physically.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why that's such a common practice. Handing someone a bottle of water, showing them where the snacks are, showing them where they can take a break for a minute, because your physical needs and your physical well-being has such a huge impact on your mental health as well.
I do sometimes wish that patients also did that checklist before they called us.
I wish that too.
I need you to drink a glass of water. I need you to take a nap. And I need you to eat a meal. And then you can call us back.
So it sounds like you guys are talking about my toddler.
Dr. Rayburn, I feel like your toddler.
Once her physical needs are met, she's the happiest girl in the world. And if one of her physical needs are not met, I can't use the word on this podcast.
So kind of wrapping this all up, what, if you could live inside of our pocket on the truck, what is it that you just want us to hear all the time, every call, when we start feeling like this?
To slow down for a minute.
Okay, I felt really targeted, but okay.
I think you all get in this mode, which is like a wonderful thing to have happen, where you're in provider mode and you're just going from one thing to the other, and it's automatic sometimes, and you're just doing everything you need to for the patient, and that's wonderful. And sometimes if you're starting to feel really stressed out, it is okay and it is necessary to slow down for a minute. A pause in the right moment is not going to be detrimental to anybody, and it's going to help you to regroup, calm down, and figure out, what do I really need next? What should my next response be? What would be helpful? What is coming from a place of stress versus what is coming from an appropriate reaction to the situation?
So it's almost like we have to kind of separate ourselves and look at ourselves like we're the patient, right? Like we've shown up on scene.
Yes.
And we're having a panic attack and we think that we're dying. And then we have to try to calm down ourselves. We have to kind of put on both of those hats of, I am experiencing this in real time, but also I am this paramedic who has showed up and needs to calm down this patient that is freaking out all at once. Like we have to use those skills on ourselves almost.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful comparison.
Thank you.
And I'm proud of us. The only nutritional thing we talked about was snacks. And we didn't talk about
Just
yoga.
have them available.
Didn't talk
But
about
we
yoga.
did, yep.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about getting the full 8 hours of sleep every night.
Mhm.
Yep.
Can't wiggle on that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This was a lot.